Inside Texas death row transfers, the secret operations behind America's deadliest system. In the state of Texas, death row isn't just a place, it's a process, a system of movement, a chain of steel doors and silent paperwork that determines where a man will spend his final days. Most people imagine death row as a single dark hallway of final destination where inmates wait for execution. But the truth is far more complex and far more secretive. Because before an inmate ever reaches a death row cell, before the final appeals, before the execution chamber, there is a journey that happens in the shadows, transfers that take place before sunrise, convoys that travel without warning, prisoners moved without explanation, no public schedules, no announcements, no witnesses. Inside the Texas prison system, death row transfers are some of the most controlled and least understood operations in American corrections. Every movement is calculated, every route is planned, every risk is measured, and sometimes those transfers don't go according to plan. Inmates disappear from one unit and reappear in another. Families are left guessing. Lawyers scramble to find their clients. And behind it all is a system designed for one thing: control. Tonight, we're going inside Texas death row transfers, the hidden operations behind one of America's deadliest prison systems. We'll uncover how inmates are moved, why they're moved, and what really happens during those long rides between prison walls. Because for some inmates, the transfer itself becomes part of the punishment, and for others, it becomes the beginning of the end. Before we dive in, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. If you enjoy true crime stories like this, be sure to like the video, subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and share it with someone who'd love it too. It usually starts with a phone call, not to the inmate, not to the family, but to the transport unit. Somewhere inside a Texas correctional facility, a supervisor receives a notification, sometimes days in advance, sometimes only hours before movement begins. The message is short, clinical, routine, transfer approved, prepare inmate for movement. No explanation is required. Inside the prison system, transfers happen for many reasons: security concerns, medical needs, court appearances, administrative decisions. And on death row, every transfer carries weight, because death row inmates are not like other prisoners. Their movements are restricted. Their routines are fixed. Their locations are carefully chosen. So when one of them moves, everyone pays attention. Correctional officers begin preparations quietly. Paperwork is reviewed. Files are checked. Routes are planned. And most importantly, the inmate is evaluated. Are they considered dangerous? Have they attempted escape before? Do they have enemies at the next unit? Are they mentally stable enough for transport? Every answer determines how the transfer will happen. More restraints, more officers, more precautions. Because on Texas death row, no movement is treated as routine, even when it looks routine on paper. For most death row inmates in Texas, the journey begins at a single location: the Allen B. Polunsky Unit, a prison so closely associated with death row that many inmates simply call it a row. Hidden behind layers of fencing and razor wire, the Polunsky Unit houses some of the most closely monitored inmates in the country. Every cell is designed for isolation. Every movement is tracked. Here, inmates spend years, sometimes decades, waiting for appeals, waiting for decisions, waiting for time to run out. But occasionally, the waiting stops, and movement begins. On transfer day, the routine changes. Lights come on earlier than usual. Doors open out of sequence. Officers move with purpose. The change is subtle but noticeable, and inmates learn quickly to recognize the signs. A transfer is coming. No one knows who it's for at first, but speculation spreads through the tiers. Because on death row, movement means something. Sometimes it means court. Sometimes it means medical care. And sometimes it means a date has been set. When the time comes, the extraction team assembles. These are not ordinary correctional officers. They are trained for control movement specialists in restraint procedures and high-risk escorts. Every motion is rehearsed. Every position has a purpose. Because a transfer begins with one critical moment, opening the cell. For most inmates, that door represents the boundary between isolation and the outside world. And for officers, it represents risk. Hands must be visible. Orders must be followed. Movements must be slow. There is no room for misunderstanding. The inmate is instructed to turn around. Hands through the slot. Wrists crossed. The restraints go on first. Handcuffs. Waist chain. Leg irons. Each piece is checked, then checked again. Because once that inmate leaves the cell, there is no margin for error. The door opens, and for a brief moment, the inmate stands in the hallway, a space few death row inmates ever see. The walk to transport is longer than most people expect. Hallways stretch through facility like arteries, controlled corridors connecting isolation units to the outside world. Every door must be opened separately. Every section must be cleared. Nothing is rushed. The inmate walks surrounded by officers, some in front, some behind, some watching every movement. Boots echo against concrete floors. Keys jingle softly. Radios crackle with quiet updates. Movement in progress. Section secure. Continue escort. For the inmate, this walk can feel surreal. After years in a single cell, even a hallway can feel enormous. Every step is unfamiliar. Every sound is sharper. Every detail stands out. And at the end of that hallway is a door that leads outside, a place many death row inmates haven't seen in years. Transfers often happen in the early morning, before the Texas heat rises, before regular movement begins, before most of the prison population is awake. The timing isn't accidental. Fewer people means fewer risks, less visibility, less noise, less chance of interference. When the door opens, the outside air hits differently. Cooler, fresher, unfamiliar. For some inmates, it's the first time they felt open air in years. But the moment doesn't last long, because outside, the transport vehicle is already waiting, engine running, doors locked, officers standing by. And once the inmate is placed inside, the journey begins. Texas prison transport vehicles are built for control. Reinforced windows, secure doors, separate compartments. Inside, inmates are placed in individual sections designed to prevent contact with others. Movement is restricted. Visibility is limited. It's not meant to be comfortable. It's meant to be secure. Every transfer follows a strict protocol. Head counts, restraint checks, documentation. Officers confirm identities multiple times. Because mistakes cannot happen. Not here. Not with death row inmates. Once everything is confirmed, the doors close, and the outside world disappears again. Once the vehicle leaves the prison gates, the operation changes. Inside the facility, everything is predictable. On the road, anything can happen. Traffic delays, mechanical issues, weather changes. Every mile introduces uncertainty. And that uncertainty is exactly what the system is designed to minimize. Routes are planned in advance. Stops are limited. Communication remains constant. Dispatch tracks every movement. Location updates are sent regularly. Because when a death row inmate is on the road, the system is exposed. And exposure means risk. The routes used for death row transfers are rarely the fastest, and they're almost never predictable. Transport teams avoid patterns whenever possible. Highways change. Departure times shift. Even the order transfers can be rearranged at the last minute. The goal is simple. No one outside the system should know where the vehicle is going. There are no public schedules, no announcements, no warnings. For the officers inside the vehicle, the route exists only on official paperwork, and sometimes not even there. Instructions can be delivered just before departure, reducing the risk of leaks. Because in the past, leaks have happened. And when information escapes a prison system, it creates vulnerability. Families show up unexpectedly. Protesters gather. Media crews appear. Every one of those situations creates a complication. And complications are exactly what the system is designed to avoid. So the vehicles move quietly through Texas roads, just another white transport van among thousands of others. Unnoticed, unremarkable, invisible. Inside, the inmates have no idea where they're going. No signs, no announcements, no explanations, just motion and time. Inside a transport vehicle, time stretches differently. The compartments are small. The air feels still. The motion of the road becomes constant, a low vibration through metal and steel. Some inmates try to count the turns. Left, right, highway speed, stoplight pause, trying to map the journey in their heads. Others give up and sit in silence, because guessing the destination rarely helps. Most inmates only find out where they're going when they arrive. And sometimes, not even then. Conversations are limited. Officers rarely speak unless necessary, and inmates are rarely told anything beyond basic instructions. Sit still, face forward. No sudden movements. The silence becomes part of the process, part of the control, part of the uncertainty, because uncertainty keeps inmates off balance. And in prison transport, control is everything. Death row transfers don't happen without a reason, but those reasons aren't always shared. Sometimes it's medical. Specialized treatment is only available at certain facilities, and death row inmates, like anyone else, need medical care. Other times it's legal, court appearances, hearings, appeals. The legal process doesn't stop just because someone is on death row, and occasionally the reason is security, conflicts between inmates, threats against staff, concerns about stability. Even on death row, tensions exist. And when tensions rise too high, movement becomes a solution. Transfers can separate enemies, disrupt plans, restore order. But there's one reason for transfers that carries more weight than any other: an execution date. When a date is set, movement becomes inevitable. Because in Texas, executions don't happen on death row. They happen somewhere else. For inmates with execution dates, the journey eventually leads to a single destination: the Huntsville unit, known to many simply as the Walls. This historic prison houses the execution chamber, the final stop in the Texas death penalty process. And unlike other transfers, this one is rarely reversed. When inmates arrive at the Walls unit under an execution order, their time becomes structured in a new way. Legal visits increase. Security tightens. Schedules change. Every day becomes measured, because from this point forward, everything is moving toward a single moment. Not every transfer happens in a single trip. Sometimes distances are long. Sometimes schedules are tight. Sometimes logistics require delays. And when that happens, inmates wait. Temporary holding areas exist inside certain facilities, spaces designed for short stays between movements. They're not permanent cells, not long-term housing, just places to wait. Concrete benches, metal doors, fluorescent lights. Time slows down in these spaces because the inmate is no longer where they were, but not yet where they're going. And that in-between state can be unsettling. No routine, no familiarity, no sense of permanence, just waiting. Every transfer creates paperwork, forms documenting movement, forms documenting restraints, forms documenting time and location. Every step must be recorded. Who approved the transfer? Who escorted the inmate when the movement began? When it ended? The paper trail is essential, because without it, there is no accountability. And in a system this complex, accountability matters. Mistakes can have consequences. Wrong inmate, wrong destination, wrong timing. Even small errors can create serious problems. So the paperwork follows the inmate from one unit to another, a record of movement through the system, a written history of where they've been and where they're going. Transport officers occupy a unique role in the prison system. They see inmates at moments others don't. Between facilities, between routines, between chapters. For some officers, transport duty becomes routine. Another day, another transfer, another road trip between prison units. But death row transfers are different. They carry weight. because everyone involved understands what death row means, even if it's never spoken out loud. Some officers avoid learning the details. They don't read the case files. They don't ask questions, because knowing too much can make the job harder. And transport requires focus, procedure, timing, security. Emotions are distractions, and distractions can be dangerous. So most officers stick to protocol. Do the job, finish the transfer, move on to the next one. Not every inmate agrees to be transferred quietly. Most comply, because resistance rarely changes the outcome. But sometimes an inmate refuses to leave the cell, refuses to walk, refuses to cooperate. When that happens, the process slows down. Negotiations begin first. Officers give instructions again, explain the situation, offer the inmate a chance to comply, because voluntary compliance is always safer. But if compliance doesn't happen, the extraction team returns, and the transfer continues anyway, because in the prison system, movement isn't optional. Texas is a big state, and prison units are spread across hundreds of miles. Some transfers take an hour. Others take most of the day. Miles of highway stretch between facilities' long, empty roads, cutting through rural areas and small towns. For inmates, the outside world becomes a blur. Trees passing by, buildings in the distance, sky through reinforced glass. Small glimpses of a world they no longer live in. For some, it's a reminder. For others, it's a memory. And for those heading toward an execution date, it can feel like a farewell, even if no one says it out loud. Arriving at a new facility isn't simple. The vehicle doesn't just pull in and unload. Arrival is controlled as carefully as departure. Gates open one at a time. Vehicles stop for identification. Officers confirm paperwork. Only when everything matches, the process continues. Because once an inmate enters a new facility, responsibility transfers with them. And responsibility must be clear. Always. No confusion. No gaps. No mistakes. Every new cell feels different, even when it looks the same. Different sounds, different smells, different routines. For inmates, adjustment begins immediately. Learning new schedules, learning new rules, learning new expectations. Even small differences matter. Meal times, lighting, noise levels. Because in prison, routine is survival. And every transfer disrupts that routine. Some transfers are routine, others are not. There are movements that happen quietly without explanation even inside the system. Administrative decisions, security concerns, special circumstances. Details are limited. Information is restricted. And those involved often say little afterward, because not every transfer becomes public knowledge, and not every story gets told. But sometimes, those hidden transfers leave behind questions that don't always get answers. Not all transfers happen in the early morning. Some happen at night, late enough that most of the prison is quiet, late enough that the roads are nearly empty, late enough that movement attracts less attention. Night transfers follow the same procedures, the same paperwork, the same restraints, the same careful planning, but the atmosphere is different. The prison feels heavier at night, quieter. Shadows stretch longer under artificial lights. Hallways echo more than they do during the day. Even routine commands seem louder in the silence. For inmates, night transfers can feel more unsettling than daytime movement. There are fewer visual cues, fewer sounds, less sense of direction. The world outside becomes darkness, and headlights brief flashes of visibility, surrounded by long stretches of black. And when you can't see where you're going, the unknown feels closer. Some death row inmates require what the system calls special handling. It's a neutral term, administrative language. But behind it are specific concerns. History of violence, escape attempts, threats against staff, mental instability. When an inmate is flagged for special handling, the transfer changes. More officers, more restraints, more planning. Sometimes the inmate is placed in additional security, devices designed to limit movement further. Sometimes transport vehicles are arranged differently. Sometimes routes are shortened or adjusted. Every adjustment is meant to reduce risk, because in transport, risk is dynamic, and preparation is the only defense against it. Not every death row transfer is about security. Some are about survival. Death row inmates often spend years in isolation, and over time, health problems develop, heart conditions, respiratory issues, chronic illness. And when treatment isn't available at a specific facility, movement becomes necessary. Medical transfers follow their own procedures. Restraints may be adjusted. Medical staff may be involved. Equipment may be prepared in advance. Because transporting someone with medical needs adds a new layer of complexity. Timing matters more. Distance matters more. And delays become more dangerous. For the inmate, medical transfers can be both hopeful and frightening. Hopeful because treatment is possible. Frightening because movement always carries uncertainty. Sometimes the destination isn't another prison. Sometimes it's a courthouse. Death row inmates continue to fight legal battles long after sentencing. Appeals, hearings, and motions can stretch across decades. And occasionally, they must appear in person. Legal transfers are coordinated carefully between correctional staff and local authorities. Schedules must align. Security must be ensured. Routes must be planned. Because court appearances introduce something prison transfers usually avoid: public exposure. Vehicles may be seen. Entrances may be observed. Movements may be noticed. And every moment outside controlled prison space increases unpredictability. During a transfer, responsibility for the inmate is never unclear. At every moment, someone is accountable. When the inmate leaves one facility, documentation confirms the transfer of custody. When the inmate arrives at another facility, documentation confirms acceptance. Every signature matters. Every timestamp matters. Because in corrections, responsibility must be traceable. If something goes wrong, the system needs to know exactly when and where it happened. So custody moves like a chain, one link connecting to the next. Never broken, never skipped, always documented. Even the most carefully planned transfer can encounter delays. Traffic accidents, road construction, mechanical issues, weather changes. Each delay introduces a new challenge. Because transport vehicles aren't designed for flexibility. They follow schedules. They follow plans. And when plans change, adjustments must be made quickly. Sometimes vehicles pull into secure sally ports at nearby facilities. Sometimes they wait in controlled areas. Sometimes they continue moving until the problem is resolved. Every decision balances two priorities: security and safety. Transport vehicles are maintained regularly, inspected, serviced, checked, but no machine is perfect. And when a mechanical problem happens during a death row transfer, the response is immediate. The vehicle pulls over in a controlled location if possible. Officers communicate with dispatch. Backup is requested. The inmate remains secured inside unless removal becomes absolutely necessary. Because once an inmate exits the vehicle outside a secure facility, risk increases dramatically. So every effort is made to keep the inmate contained until help arrives. And help always arrives. Eventually, backup teams exist for moments like these. Additional officers trained to respond when a transfer needs support. They may bring another vehicle, additional personnel, extra equipment. The system prepares for failure because failure is always possible. And preparation reduces panic because panic creates mistakes. And mistakes can be dangerous. So when backup arrives, the process resumes controlled and methodical, just like it began. Transfers don't just move inmates physically. They move them mentally. Every transfer disrupts routine. Every transfer introduces uncertainty. And uncertainty can be stressful. Some inmates experience anxiety before movement. Others withdraw. Others become restless. Because transfers represent change, and change in prison is rarely comfortable. For death row inmates, transfers can feel especially significant. Every movement carries meaning, even when that meaning isn't explained. Inside prison, information spreads differently, not through announcements, not through official statements, but through whispers. Guesses, fragments of conversation. Inmates watch movements closely. They notice patterns. They track who leaves and who returns. And when someone disappears from a cell, speculation begins. Was it medical? Was it court? Was it an execution date? Rumors fill the gaps left by silence. And sometimes the rumors are wrong, but sometimes they're not. For families, transfers can be confusing. Notification doesn't always happen immediately. Information isn't always clear. Phone calls go unanswered. Messages take time. And during that time, families wait, wondering where their loved one has gone, wondering why, wondering when they'll hear something. For those with relatives on death row, every unknown can feel heavy, because movement can mean many things, and not all of them are good. Lawyers often track transfers carefully, because location affects access. Access affects preparation. Preparation affects cases. If an inmate moves unexpectedly, legal plans may have to change. Meetings may be delayed. Documents may need to be redirected. Schedules may shift. So attorneys pay attention to movement, sometimes learning about transfers only after they've already happened, and sometimes racing to catch up. Some transfers carry more weight than others. There is one type of transfer that everyone recognizes, even when no one says it out loud. The final transfer, from Pulaski to Huntsville, from death row to the Walls unit. This transfer follows the same procedures as any other, the same restraints, the same paperwork, the same escort, but the meaning is different because this transfer has a deadline, and everyone involved knows it. For inmates on a final transfer, the road can feel longer. Even when it isn't, time feels different. Moments stretch. Thoughts linger. Outside the window, the world continues normally. Cars pass by. People go about their day, unaware of who is inside the transport vehicle beside them, unaware of where it's going, and unaware of what waits at the end of the road. At the Walls unit, arrivals are processed carefully, identity confirmed, paperwork reviewed, custody transferred. Every detail must match, because this is the final stop, and there is no room for error here. None. The holding cells at the Walls unit are simple, plain, functional, designed for short stays. But those stays carry weight, because from here, time becomes very precise. Schedules tighten. Procedures begin. Everything moves according to plan, because at this stage, the system is already in motion, and it won't stop. Once an inmate arrives at the Walls unit for a scheduled execution, time changes. Not just psychologically, but officially. Every hour begins to matter. Every movement is scheduled. Every procedure is timed and recorded with precision. The system that once moved slowly through years of appeals and paperwork now begins to accelerate. What once felt distant now becomes immediate. Staff members work from detailed timelines. Legal calls are scheduled. Visits are arranged. Security checks increase. Every action is logged. Every step is verified. Because once an execution date is active, the margin for error disappears. The clock has started, and everyone inside the system knows it. Behind the scenes, preparations extend beyond the inmate and the prison itself. Witness lists are reviewed. In Texas executions, certain people are allowed to be present. This can include victims' family members, selected media witnesses, and sometimes relatives of the inmate. Each name must be approved. Each person must be identified. Each visit must be scheduled. Because on the day of an execution, nothing is spontaneous. Everything is planned. Even grief is scheduled. Even closure is timed. The system moves forward regardless of emotion, regardless of opinion, regardless of what anyone wishes could be different. Even after a transfer to Walls unit, the legal process doesn't always stop. Lawyers continue filing motions. Appeals continue moving through courts. Emergency hearings can be requested, sometimes at the last minute, because until the final moment, the outcome is not always certain. Courts may review new evidence. Judges may issue rulings. And occasionally, an order comes down that changes everything. A delay, a reconsideration, a stay. In those moments, the entire system pauses, waiting for instructions, waiting for clarity, waiting to see what happens next. Because even in a system built on schedules, the law can intervene. A stay of execution can arrive at any time, hours before, minutes before, sometimes even after preparations have already begun. When a stay is issued, everything stops. Immediately, phones ring, messages are relayed, orders are confirmed and reconfirmed, because no one wants to make a mistake at this stage. The inmate may be returned to a holding cell. Procedures are halted. Staff step back. And for a brief time, uncertainty returns. Some stays last days, others last years, and some are eventually lifted. Not every final transfer remains final. Sometimes an inmate who has been moved to Huntsville is transferred back to Pulaski, back to death row, back to waiting. The journey reverses. The same restraints, the same vehicles, the same roads, but a different meaning. Because returning from a final transfer means something changed, something intervened, something delayed the inevitable, at least for now. Transport officers see many inmates over the years. Faces come and go, names blur together, transfers blend into routine. But some transfers stay with them, not because of what happened, but because of what they meant. Certain names stand out, certain dates linger, because even in a job built on procedure, memory doesn't always follow protocol. Some officers remember the quiet inmates. Some remember the talkative ones. Some remember the ones who asked questions. And some remember the ones who said nothing at all. Some inmates talk during transfers. Not always, not often, but sometimes. They ask where they're going. They ask how long it will take. They ask what happens next. Sometimes they talk about their cases. Sometimes they talk about their families. Sometimes they talk about nothing important at all. Just words filling space. Because silence can feel heavier than conversation. And during long drives, words can pass the time, even if no one responds. Other inmates stay silent the entire time. No questions, no conversation, no reaction, just stillness, eyes forward, hands restrained, waiting. For some, silence is control. For others, silence is acceptance. And sometimes, silence is the only thing left. Texas operates one of the largest prison systems in the United States. And within that system, death row transfers are just one piece of a much larger operation. Thousands of inmates move between facilities every year. For court, for medical care, for classification changes, for security reasons. Movement is constant, and coordination is essential, because without coordination, the system breaks down. Every transfer passes through layers of security, approval layers, documentation layers, operational layers. No single person controls the entire process. Instead, responsibility is shared, divided, distributed, so that no one mistake can compromise everything. It's a system built on redundancy, because redundancy creates safety, and safety protects everyone involved. Staff, public, inmates, all of them depend on the system working the way it's designed to work. From the outside, a transfer might look simple. A vehicle leaves one prison, arrives at another. An inmate moves from one cell to the next. But inside the system, nothing is simple. Every movement involves planning. Every plan involves coordination. Every coordination involves communication. And every communication must be clear, because confusion creates risk, and risk must be controlled. Despite all the planning, all the procedures, all the safeguards, transfers are still carried out by people. People who get tired, people who make mistakes, people who carry stress. Because correctional work is demanding, long hours, high stakes, constant vigilance. And even in the most controlled environments, human factors remain, which is why the system is designed to double-check everything, and then check it again. Most transfers are never reported, never documented publicly, never discussed outside the system. They happen quietly, without attention, without recognition. Just another movement on another day. But behind each transfer is a story, a case, a life, a history, even when those stories remain untold. For many death row inmates, one question remains constant. When will the next transfer happen? Because movement means change. And change can mean anything. Court, medical care, new housing, or something else entirely. The uncertainty becomes part of daily life, part of the routine, part of the waiting. Even in a system built on procedure, emotion exists, not always visible, not always acknowledged, but present. Transfers can carry emotional weight for everyone involved. Inmates, families, staff, because movement often represents transition, and transition can be difficult, even when it's expected. Every transfer ends the same way it begins, with paperwork, forms completed, signatures recorded, times logged, because documentation marks the official end of movement, proof that the inmate arrived, proof that custody transferred, proof that the system functioned as intended. And once one transfer ends, another begins, another inmate, another route, another journey between prison walls. The system doesn't stop. It keeps moving, constantly, quietly, efficiently, because movement is part of its design. Most people think death row is about a single moment, a verdict, a sentence, an execution. But the reality is different. Death row is a process, a long chain of events stretching across years. And transfers are part of that chain, quietly connecting one stage to the next, often unnoticed, often misunderstood, but always present. Here's what many people don't realize. Some death row inmates are transferred more times than they can remember, between units, between courts, between holding cells, back and forth across the system. Years of movement, years of waiting, years of uncertainty, long before any execution date is set. Because death row isn't just about the end. It's about everything that happened before it. And sometimes, the waiting lasts longer than anyone expects. In the end, a death row transfer is just a journey from one place to another, a vehicle on a road, an inmate in restraints, officers following procedure. But inside, that simple movement is something more. Time passing, decisions unfolding, lives changing. Because every transfer marks a moment in a story that started long before the prison gates and continues long after they close. Some inmates return, some move forward, and some make the journey only once. The vehicles keep moving, the paperwork keeps filing, the doors keep opening and closing. And somewhere in Texas, another transfer is already being planned, another route mapped, another journey prepared. Because inside America's deadliest system, the movement never really stops. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss our next deep dive into the hidden world of prisons.